the privatization of the South African Airways, or the privatization of any state-owned enterprise, is unconstitutional. And now, why do I say this is unconstitutional? Because Section 27 of the South African Constitution, in subsection 1, says that everyone has the right to have access to healthcare services. Everyone has the right to have access to sufficient food and water. Everyone has the right to have access to social security. Now, in subsection 2 of section 27 of the South African Constitution, the Constitution says that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of each of these rights. Which means that the South African Constitution is saying that the government must use the resources that it has to realize the rights which the Constitution enshrines. Meaning that if the Constitution is saying that you and I have the right to healthcare services, sufficient food and water, and social security, the Constitution is expected that since South Africa, first of all, is collecting taxes. Second, it also has income-generating enterprises, like the state-owned enterprises, like SAA, like Eskom, like PRASA, and other state-owned enterprises. The state, the government must use those resources to make sure that you and I have these non-negotiable rights fulfilled. So what does that then mean? It means that the state cannot sell SAA either in whole or in part. Why? Because we still have people in South Africa who do not have sufficient food, who are homeless, who go to sleep in the street, who are starving each and every night. We still have people who don't have access to healthcare services. And even those people who still have access to maybe to a clinic, that clinic doesn't have a doctor. People go to the clinic, they find nurses, and the nurses, they just use that thing that doctors use to check what's wrong with you, and then they just always, almost all the time, give you a Panado. Yet, the state, which was supposed to be using state-owned enterprises like SAA to fulfill the rights for you and me to have access to healthcare services, is now selling the state-owned enterprises. So that's why the sale of any state-owned enterprise is unconstitutional. Because the Constitution is saying that the state is supposed to use the state-owned enterprises to make sure that all the rights that are in the Constitution for you and me to find a fulfilling life within South Africa must be fulfilled by using those resources like SOEs, like SAA, like Eskom, like PRASA. It's like the Constitution is saying that, you know what, we know that the state owns a farm, and we're saying the Constitution is saying that we want each and every person to have a square meal, 3 square meals a day, because the state owns, or the state on behalf of the public, on behalf of you and me, owns a farm. And then the state goes out to sell the farm to a private person. What does that then mean? It means that the state is disabling itself to fulfill the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. Which means that the people who are doing this, say Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan, and Ino Godongwan, are people who hate the Constitution, are people who are failing to actually protect the Constitution as the oath that they take of office says. And there is no support for the privatization of SAA from the Constitution, as I've already indicated. And there is no support for the privatization of SAA even from the public policy that we know, like the National Development Plan 2030. Because in the National Development Plan 2030, the National Development Plan 2030 recognizes the state-owned enterprises like SAA, like Eskom, like PRASA, like Transnet as strategic institutions for the development of South Africa. And now, when you take these state-owned enterprises and sell them to private enterprise, it means that now the state is taking responsibility of developing South Africa and giving it to private enterprises. And if we are giving responsibility to develop the state to private enterprises, it means now all citizens now must bow to the law or to the demands of private enterprises. And since we know that the business of private investment is to actually generate profit, not to develop, it means that the only time that these private enterprises which are buying or will buy state-owned enterprises will ever engage in development is if they see that they're going to make profit. And if they don't make profit, that means they're not going to develop. You see, that's where the problem comes, and that's where the privatization of SAA is unconstitutional, and that's where the future privatization of other state-owned enterprises is unconstitutional. And I reason this in my case at the Constitutional Court. I'm telling the Constitutional Court, I'm saying that this is unconstitutional because the Constitution is saying that the state is supposed to use resources like SAA to fulfill the rights that are enshrined within the Constitution to make that each and every South African enjoys being a citizen of the state, because the state is making sure that the right to have access to health care, the right to sufficient food and water, the right to have social security is fulfilled by the state. And then if the state is selling this state-owned enterprises, it is disabling itself to fulfill those rights. But yet, to my shock, I'm shocked that now the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land, has now issued a fraudulent court order. It's like, for me, it's like I'm trying to grasp this thing, like, how can the Constitutional Court issue a fraudulent court order so that the state, the president, the Minister of Public Enterprises, the Minister of Finance can take the resources which are supposed to be used for the development of South Africa, for the fulfillment of rights which are enshrined within the Constitution, and sell it to a private enterprise? Meaning that these politicians, Cyril Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan, Enoch Godongwana, are not in public office in order to protect the Constitution, in order to fulfill what the Constitution demands from the state, but to make sure that they take public resources and give it to private enterprise, to make sure that they take public money and launder it to make it private money. Meaning that under Ramaphosa, under Pravin Gordhan, under Enoch Godongwana, the state is being used as a money laundering scheme where public money is changed into private money through things like privatization. And then the Constitutional Court is actually helping this. The Constitutional Court, which is supposed to protect us, the Constitutional Court, which is supposed to protect and make sure that the rights which are enshrined within the Constitution of South Africa are fulfilled, is now helping in terms of making sure that the rights are not fulfilled. In terms of making sure that we are no longer under the state is no longer the steward of the desires of all South African citizens, but the state is used as a tool to serve private interests. And then I don't know what to do, because if I took the matter to the Constitutional Court and the Constitutional Court has issued a fraudulent court order, I don't know what to do. So I'm just saying that we need now to confront the Constitutional Court, to confront Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, to say that you cannot allow this to happen. And this matter between Dempapi Morare and Cyril Ramaphosa and Pravin Gordhan and Enoch Godongwana and the ANC and the Agaso Consortium must be adjudicated accordingly, so that there can be an impartial judgment, where I believe that we win the case, because the state does not have any case and the Agaso Consortium does not have any case to win for trying to privatize state-owned enterprises for the benefit of a chosen small clique of people who are going to psychologically and economically oppress us.